When I think about how everything began, what comes to me isn't pain, it's calm. I met him at a time in my life when I wasn't looking for anything extraordinary. He didn't seem to be either. He spoke softly, had a steady, peaceful gaze, the kind of person who doesn't enter a room taking up space, but somehow ends up staying. We started talking without urgency, without promises, without games. What drew me to him wasn't intensity. It was consistency. He was there. And for a long time, that felt like enough. The relationship grew the way quiet things grow, without noise. There were plans. Marriage, a home we slowly built together. Then came the children, 2 of them. And with them, a routine that blended exhaustion with a very real kind of happiness. From the outside, we were what many would call a solid couple. And honestly, I believed that too. I was never jealous. I never felt the need to watch or check. I never questioned the way he looked at the world or at other people. I trusted him. And real trust makes no sound. Over time, some things began to change. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be clearly pointed out. He started coming home later. He grew quieter. Sometimes he felt distant, even while sitting right beside me. I told myself it was work, fatigue, a phase. I never told anyone about this. Not out of shame, but because I couldn't explain it myself. It was like trying to describe a discomfort that had no name. The nights grew longer. I would stare at the ceiling, replaying old moments, trying to find where something had shifted. But everything seemed too normal to be the end, until the day he asked me to sit down. There was no anger on his face, no urgency, no argument. He simply sat in front of me, took a deep breath, and said he needed to tell me something. In that moment, my legs went weak, the air felt heavier, and I knew, without knowing exactly what, that nothing I had imagined would be enough to prepare me, because there are truths that don't arrive screaming. They arrive quietly and still manage to bring everything down. He took a few seconds before he started to speak. He didn't seem nervous. He seemed tired. He said he had been trying to find the right moment, that he had rehearsed that conversation many times in his head, that he didn't want to hurt me, but he also didn't know how to keep pretending that everything was fine. I listened in silence, without interrupting, without knowing exactly what to expect. He said that, for some time now, he had been feeling confused, that old feelings had started to grow stronger, that there were things inside him he tried to ignore, to hide, to push away, but he couldn't anymore. When he said he was in love with someone else, my heart tightened, not because of jealousy, but because it confirmed that I hadn't imagined the absences. I took a deep breath, still trying to keep my ground steady. Then he continued. He said that person wasn't a woman, that it was a man, and that, for the first time, he felt he needed to be honest with himself, and with me. I don't remember exactly what I answered. I only remember the feeling, as if something inside me had shifted out of place. There were no screams, there were no accusations, there was silence. He said he didn't want to continue the marriage anymore, that he needed to live his truth, that it wouldn't be fair to me to stay halfway. I thought about everything at once. The years together, the house, the children sleeping in the room next door, the life that had seemed so solid. The question wasn't why, it was how. How do you explain this to children? How do you reorganize an entire life in just a few minutes? How do you keep breathing when everything feels suspended? We talked to the children together. He was there. He tried to explain with simple, careful words. He said he would still be their father, that his love for them wouldn't change. I held their hands. I smiled when I had to. I swallowed my tears, because someone needed to be strong in that moment, and it was me. That night, when the house fell silent, I sat alone. I looked out the window. The streetlights were on, as if nothing had happened. And that's when the pain truly arrived. Not as despair, but as unanswered questions. As memories that came without asking permission. As an early longing for something that was still there, but already gone. Love hadn't ended all at once. Now I understood. He had been saying goodbye little by little, while I was still trying to stay. After that conversation, the routine continued. The days moved on with schedules, commitments, tasks, but inside the house, something had shifted out of place. He was still there, for a while, not like before. There was a distance that was hard to explain, even while sharing the same space. It felt like living with someone who had already left. On the inside, the nights grew long. Silence began to carry weight. I would get up slowly, so I wouldn't wake the children, and stand by the window, looking at the almost empty street. That was when the memories came. Without warning, I remembered when I first met him. The simple way everything began. How we built a life, without rushing. The day I found out I was pregnant for the first time. The good kind of shock. His smile. Thinking about that hurt more than imagining the future. During the day, I had to function. I made coffee, helped with school, answered questions I still didn't know how to answer myself. I stayed strong because they needed that from me. But there was a tiredness that wasn't physical. It was emotional, a silent weight of holding everything together alone on the inside. Sometimes I ask myself when he had started to drift away, if it was something I didn't notice, if there were signs I ignored, because I trusted too much. Those questions followed me while I cleaned the house, while I folded clothes, while I organized things that no longer made sense. He spoke little. I spoke even less, and between us settled a silence that wasn't peace. I still didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know how to reorganize an entire life, much less how to rebuild myself while still needing to be a mother. A foundation, a balance. What I did know was that something inside me was beginning to wake up. It wasn't strength. It was awareness. Arriving slowly, still shy. But before any new beginning, I had to cross the hardest part. Staying in the house, staying in the pain, staying with the unanswered questions, because love hadn't ended all at once. It was still there. In the details, in the memories, in the silence, and I still didn't know what to do with all of it. There came a moment when I realized I could no longer keep going the same way. Not because the pain was gone, but because carrying guilt along with sadness was consuming me. I spent days trying to rewrite the past inside my head, revisiting conversations, remembering small gestures, trying to find the exact point where everything could have been different. But the truth is, some stories don't have that point. They don't break. They wear down. I began to understand that trusting was not a mistake. Loving was not naivete. Believing was not weakness. It was simply surrender. That awareness didn't come all at once. It came slowly, while I did simple things, while washing the dishes in silence, while folding clothes we no longer shared, while watching my children play, trying to preserve the lightness they deserved. I was still crying, but it wasn't the same kind of crying. It was less confused, more conscious. I began to realize that I had spent too much time trying to understand his choices, and almost no time looking at myself, at what I felt, at what I needed, at the woman I was becoming through that process. He began to organize his own departure. Nothing abrupt, nothing dramatic. But every box he packed was a reminder that that chapter was truly ending. I watched everything in silence, not because it didn't hurt, but because arguing wouldn't change reality. The hardest part wasn't accepting the end of the marriage. It was accepting that the life I had imagined would not continue that way. And still, something new was happening inside me, a kind of sad, yet steady clarity. I no longer wanted to live trying to fit into a story that no longer fit me. I no longer wanted to shrink myself to hold together something that wasn't whole. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was no longer a prison. I was learning how to let go, without hatred, without conflict, without denying what had been lived. Because before moving forward, I needed to do something I had never done before. Choose myself, even without knowing exactly how. After the house became mine alone, the silence took on a different shape. It was no longer the tense silence from when we were still there together. It was an empty silence, one that echoed. It was in one of those moments, sitting alone in the living room, that something passed through me, a memory, small, almost insignificant at the time. I remembered a night when he came home later than usual. He didn't seem tired, He seemed distant. I asked how his day had been. He answered with just a few words, barely looking at me. In that moment, I didn't question it. I smiled. I went on with the routine. Today, when I think about it, I realize it wasn't exhaustion. It was absence. Other memories followed, interrupted conversations, touches that became rare, plans he no longer cared to talk about. There was a day when I spoke about the future, about something simple, maybe a trip. He just nodded. He didn't disagree, but he didn't engage either. I remember thinking it was just a phase, that every marriage goes through moments like that. Today I understand. Not every distance comes with a warning. Some arrive disguised as normality. Those memories hurt, not because I wanted to go back, but because they showed me the ending wasn't sudden. It had been announced through small gestures, and I chose not to see, not out of blindness, but out of love. There was one specific moment that returned with force. A conversation where he said, almost unintentionally, that sometimes he felt like he was living a life that wasn't entirely his. At the time, I hugged him. I said everything would be okay, that we were together. Today, those words carry a different weight. I no longer blame myself, but I acknowledge it. There were signs, and they were stored away. In the place of hope, as these memories surfaced, I noticed something different within me. A mix of sadness and clarity. As if, finally, I could look at the past without getting lost in it. But understanding was not the same as accepting, and accepting still hurt, because one thing is noticing the signs afterward. Another is learning to live with what they mean. And I was still in the middle of that path. Over time, the days began to find a new rhythm. Nothing extraordinary, nothing easy, but possible. The children continued with their routines. They woke up early, went to their courses, came back telling small stories about their day. They didn't ask many questions, maybe because they were also trying to understand everything in their own way. Sometimes, in the middle of a simple conversation, one of them would look at me and ask if I was okay, if I needed help, if I wanted them to take care of something around the house. I would smile, say that everything was fine. But inside, that quiet care touched me more than any words ever could. They were moving forward too, in their own way, and that gave me strength. The house no longer felt so strange. It still carried memories, but it was also beginning to welcome new habits. I was learning how to occupy the spaces on my own, without feeling like something was missing all the time. It was on an ordinary afternoon that he came back. He didn't give much notice. He simply asked to talk. He sat in the same place as before, but now, he seemed different, lighter, and at the same time, more aware. He asked for forgiveness, said he knew he could have spoken sooner, that he could have been honest long before everything broke apart that way, that his lack of courage caused unnecessary pain. He said that, despite everything, he felt relieved for having told the truth, that he had carried that weight for years, that today, he felt free for finally being who he truly was. I listened in silence, not because it didn't hurt, but because I no longer needed to react. He said he just needed to know if I could forgive him, not to ease his guilt, but so that our story could finally rest. I didn't answer right away. Some requests don't ask for haste. They ask for truth. After he left, I stayed seated for a while, thinking about everything we had lived, about what could have been different, about what was never under my control. I still didn't know exactly what I felt, but I knew that something inside me was preparing to close a cycle, because moving forward doesn't happen suddenly. It's a process. And I was getting close to understanding what to do with everything that remained. After that conversation, I thought for a long time before responding, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to be honest with myself. I understood that forgiving didn't mean agreeing with everything that happened, nor did it mean erasing the pain. It meant stopping the act of carrying a weight that no longer needed to be mine. When I said I forgave him, it wasn't an impulsive act, it was a conscious choice. I realized that, despite everything, he had the courage to tell the truth, late, but he did. He could have hidden it. He could have lived two lives. He could have kept the marriage alive for appearances, and that, I knew, would have been even more cruel. Knowing the truth hurt, but it also set me free, because there were no more doubts, no more assumptions, no more attempts to fix something that was no longer whole. After that, I felt something different, not joy, but relief. For the first time in a long while, I stopped waiting. I stopped trying to understand what was never in my control, and I began to look at the life that was still there, waiting for me. It was on an ordinary day, one without a special date, that I saw myself in the mirror, my hair tied up carelessly, a tired face, a distant gaze. I stayed there for a few seconds longer than usual, and I thought about how I had placed myself second for so long, about how I had survived, but not truly lived. In that moment, something simple happened. It wasn't a grand decision. It was a quiet thought. I can start again, not to prove anything to anyone, but to recognize myself once more. And maybe it was there, right there, in front of the mirror, that the change began to take shape. After that day in front of the mirror, I understood that I couldn't postpone it anymore. It wasn't vanity. It was survival. I started slowly. I booked an appointment at a salon I hadn't been to in months. While they were cutting my hair, I watched my reflection with a sense of strangeness, as if I were meeting again someone who had been forgotten along the way. I got my nails done. I chose a different color, not to impress, but because I wanted to. I bought a few new clothes, nothing exaggerated, simple pieces, but ones that reminded me that I still had taste, desire, identity, that I was still a woman. Beyond being a mother, beyond being an ex-wife, I started accepting invitations again. Coffee with friends, unhurried conversations, laughter that came shy at first, but, little by little, became freer. There was a trip, short, but necessary. A different place, new people, landscapes that didn't carry old memories. There, far from routine, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, lightness. I walked, observing everything, breathing deeply, realizing that the world was still beautiful, even after everything. I met new people. I talked without weight, without expectations, without fear. When I returned home, something was different. It wasn't euphoria, it was presence. The children noticed. They said I seemed lighter, more smiling. I hugged each one of them tightly, understanding that that glow wasn't just mine, it was ours. The house no longer felt like a place of waiting. It was a place of life. I was still alone, but I no longer felt empty. I knew there was still a path ahead, that not everything was resolved, that the past still existed. But now, it no longer held me the same way. I was learning to walk without carrying guilt, without hurry, without denying what I had lived. And, for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just moving forward, I was coming back to myself. Over time, something inside me began to reorganize itself. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I always knew that, at some point, I would meet someone. I never doubted that. But I also understood something important. I didn't want someone I needed to make happy, and I didn't want someone who came with the mission of making me happy. I wanted someone who would add to the joy I was already feeling, and someone to whom I would also add joy. An exchange, not a dependency. I don't know when this will happen, and for the first time, that doesn't scare me. I'm not racing against time. I'm not begging for love. I'm living my days as they are, learning to laugh again, accepting my silences, respecting my process. I understood that not everything needs to be rushed. Some things need time to mature inside us. Life, it does fall apart, yes, and sometimes it feels like everything collapses at once. But I learned that things don't fall apart to destroy us. They fall apart to show us what can no longer continue the way it was. And that's where the choice comes in. Either we move forward, or we stop. Either we rise, or we sink into the pit. I chose to continue, even tired, even hurt, even afraid. I managed to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and when I saw it, I understood that I needed to be strong. Strong for me, and strong for my children. They need to see me standing, whole, trying, living. I won't say it was easy, but I will say it was necessary. Because when I stood up, something inside me stood up too. And that was when my story truly began to change. Not because everything became perfect, but because I became stronger. And what comes after that is the most important chapter of my life. What came after the most important chapter of my life was the reunion with myself, not with who I used to be before, but with who I became after everything. I didn't come back the same. I came back more aware, more whole, more real. I learned that pain doesn't come to define us. It comes to reveal us, to reveal how strong we are, how capable we are of continuing, even when everything feels like it has ended. There were days when I thought I wouldn't make it, days when exhaustion was louder than hope, but I kept going, one step at a time, one day at a time. I understood that everything has its own timing, that some phases don't come to stay. They come to prepare us. Nothing was in vain, not the tears, not the sleepless nights, not the silent restarts. Today, I know that some things need to fall apart, so we can learn to build differently. Stronger, safer, more aware of our worth. I didn't rebuild myself to prove anything to anyone. I rebuilt myself so I wouldn't lose myself again. And if you're listening to this story now, maybe you're living through your own collapse. Maybe everything feels confusing. Maybe it hurts more than you can explain. But let me tell you something. From one woman to another, you are not at the end. You are at the beginning. The beginning of a version of you that will still surprise you. The beginning of lighter days, of firmer choices, of a life that makes sense again. Getting up doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to live inside the pain. I kept going, even afraid, even without knowing exactly how. And today, I can say with a peaceful heart, it was the best decision I've ever made. Because when we choose to continue, life responds, and it responds with strength, with clarity, with new beginnings. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder, you can do it too. In your time, in your own way. But you can.